In the summer of 2019, 21-year-old Ollie Castile was a junior at the University of Mississippi, or Ole Miss as it's more commonly known. Ollie was smart, driven, and involved in tons of activities. Up until then, her time at Ole Miss was rewarding, fulfilling, and downright fun. But if there was a dark spot on her amazing college experience, it was her tumultuous on-again, off-again relationship with Brandon Thiesfeld. On the surface, Ollie and Brandon looked like the perfect couple. However, Ollie's friends didn't like Brandon, or the way he treated her. They urged her to leave him and find someone who would give her the respect she deserved. Sadly, she didn't take their advice, and the consequences were nothing short of tragic. Before we begin, we would like to express our sincere condolences to the Castile family for their loss. Alexandria Ollie Castile was born in St. Louis, Missouri, on September 11, 1997, and her bubbly and outgoing personality began taking shape almost immediately. Ollie always had lots of friends, and she was close with her parents Cindy and Keith and her younger brother Andrew as well. She had a relatively happy and uneventful childhood. As a teenager, she attended Lindbergh High School, where she cheered, ran track, and played on the golf team. Ollie also participated in student government, was a member of the National Honor Society, and was driven to serve those less fortunate than she was. As such, she traveled to Africa and South America to teach English to poor children in rural communities. In high school, Ollie and her friend Maddie Norris were so inseparable, they even went to the prom together. Most of Ollie's friends went on to in-state colleges and universities after graduation, but she had always dreamed of attending Ole Miss in Oxford, Mississippi. Ollie loved the school's rich history and its old-fashioned Southern charm. According to her mother, she was also a big fan of the school's top-notch football team, and more importantly, she thought it would be a great place to meet a future husband. With an academic record like Ollie's, getting into Ole Miss was never really in doubt. Ollie graduated from high school in the summer of 2016 and moved to Oxford the following fall. Right off the bat, she loved Old Mississippi. Her plan was to study business and marketing and work in the fashion industry when she graduated, but she wasn't about to spend the next 4 years living in a library. Ollie didn't waste any time making friends and getting involved in on and off-campus activities. Ollie got along with everyone. She was very bubbly and spirited. She always had a smile on her face. Ollie, what are you doing? Taking a picture for Sunsets by Ollie. Follow her. She first met Brandon Thiesfeld in the fall of 2016. He was from Fort Worth, Texas, and they were instantly attracted to each other. However, they were also polar opposites in many respects. Ollie was a popular go-getter with a positive attitude. She endeared herself to nearly everyone she met. But according to a fellow student who lived in the same dorm as Brandon, he was arrogant, conceited, spoiled, and even misogynistic. He said that Brandon often made offensive comments about women, and that he bragged about being from a rich family, and that his dad could get him off the hook no matter what kind of trouble he got into. It's not clear if Brandon behaved like this around Ollie, or whether she was just attracted to bad boys. But they did start dating almost immediately. They regularly attended parties and sorority and fraternity functions together, but according to Ollie's friends, they were never technically boyfriend and girlfriend. In fact, Ollie's friends didn't even like Brandon. Many a night, they were the ones who comforted her when he did or said something rude or insensitive, or just disappeared without letting her know where he was going or who he was with. At that point, Ollie's romantic life was a mess, but she studied hard, stayed active, and spent as much time with her friends as possible. By 2019, graduation was just a year away. Shortly before the end of the spring semester, her parents drove down from St. Louis to visit. They had such a great time together that Ollie asked them to stay for a few more days. She was in good spirits when they said goodbye and pulled out of Oxford, but behind the scenes, the tension between her and Brandon was about to reach epic proportions. On April 12, 2019, Ollie informed Brandon by text that she might be pregnant. She would have preferred to tell him in person, but by then they weren't dating. Brandon ignored the text, but 2 days later on the 14th, Ollie sent him a photo of an inconclusive home pregnancy test. Eventually, he replied with a text of his own, but it was not what Ollie was expecting. Brandon's message stated that she should terminate the pregnancy, that having a child would ruin his life, and that he wouldn't support the baby if she had it. At the end, he said he definitely wasn't going to change his mind. To a caring and nurturing person like Ollie, Brandon's message must have been crushing, and as the drama unfolded, he did a number of internet searches for things like morning after pills and local abortion services. Ollie stayed in Oxford when most of her friends, classmates, and sorority sisters went home for the summer. It's unclear why she stayed, but she may have wanted to get things worked out with Brandon once and for all. Whatever the case, he drove to Fort Worth for a few days in mid-July. On the way back, he posted a photo of a Glock Model 22, .40 caliber pistol that his father had bought for him. The caption said, "Finally taking my baby back to Oxford." Brandon arrived back in Oxford about 6:30 p.m. on the evening of Tuesday, July 16th. Later that evening, he scoured the internet for silencers and suppressors that would fit his Glock. He also did a number of internet searches for things like tactical face masks and hollow-point ammunition, and more surprisingly, he read up on the infamous American serial killer Ted Bundy. Cindy Castile called Ollie to see how she was doing on the evening of Friday, July 19, 2019. Ollie had just woken up from a nap after a long day on campus, and she told her mother that she was going out that evening. She met some friends at a bar in Oxford Square that night, but Brandon sent her a text around 9 p.m. Surprisingly, he asked if he could come to her apartment, and she agreed. She may have thought that he was finally ready to make amends, so she called an Uber to take her home just after 11:30 p.m. About 20 minutes later, a surveillance camera captured her leaving Oxford Square alone. Less than an hour later at 12:46 a.m., Brandon's Chevy pickup was captured by another surveillance camera traveling on West Oxford Loop near Ollie's apartment at the retreat. Then, at 1:14 a.m., it was seen traveling in the opposite direction on the same road. According to GPS data, Ollie and Brandon's phones were traveling together towards Sardis Lake, north of Oxford, between 1:14 and about 1:55 a.m. Between 2 and 2:15, someone reported hearing multiple gunshots near the lake. Later that morning, Brandon called a friend and asked if he could crash at his place, because according to him, there was an exterminator at his apartment. Brandon's apartment wasn't the site of bug killing, but he arrived at his friend's house around 10 a.m. Before leaving at around 1:30 p.m., he did a search on the internet for Sardis, Mississippi news. Long before sunrise on the morning of Saturday, July 20, 2019, a Lafayette County deputy was on routine patrol near Sardis Lake. The unpaved roads around the lake were dotted with dilapidated fishing cabins and dark stretches of forest. It looked like it was going to be yet another uneventful morning. That is, until he turned a blind corner and his headlights illuminated something more horrific than he had ever seen. Just a few yards away was the lifeless body of a young woman lying face down on the ground. She appeared to have suffered multiple gunshot wounds to her back. The ground around her was littered with spent shell casings, all of which came from a .40 caliber semi-automatic handgun. You got there. What did you find? A white female laying on the ground with multiple gunshot wounds to her back. I have not worked a murder where somebody's been shot that many times. The deputy immediately radioed for an ambulance and a crime scene investigator. When the ambulance crew arrived, they found Allie's purse on the side of the road. Lafayette County investigator Jarrett Bundren arrived a few minutes later. He found Allie's driver's license and her University of Mississippi ID card inside her purse. Investigator Bundren was no rookie, but he had never seen a victim that had been shot so many times. He never found the deceased woman's phone, but by then he had more than enough to make a positive identification. Shortly thereafter, Cindy and Keith Castile experienced every parent's worst nightmare: the dreaded call from the police in the wee hours of the morning. "Hey Morgan, this is Wyka East. That's Lafayette County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling in regards to a friend of yours, Allie Hostel. The police came to the door, and they told us there had been a homicide and that she was the victim." As word spread, Allie's friends, family members and sorority sisters were shocked and horrified. Her high school friend, Maddie Norris, took the news particularly hard. Investigators began their hunt for the killer by contacting Allie's friends and acquaintances to see if they could shed any light on the brutal murder. Almost to a person, they mentioned one name, Brendan Thiesfeld. Investigators never recovered Allie's phone, but luckily many of the text messages between her and Brandon had synced to her Apple phone. They eventually got a hold of Brandon on the morning of Sunday, July 21st, and asked if he would come to the station so they could ask him a few questions. He said he was busy that day, but promised to come the following morning at 8:30 a.m. Investigators still weren't sure who had killed Allie, but Brendan was a person of interest from the very beginning. Needless to say, they weren't particularly surprised when he didn't show up at the station as he said he would. Because he was a potential flight risk, they were able to obtain an arrest warrant under exigent circumstances. This meant they could start tracking his cell phone, and lo and behold, Brendan appeared to be driving north on I-55 towards Memphis, Tennessee. They alerted other law enforcement agencies along the way to be on the lookout for his black Chevy pickup truck with the license plate TAK3IT. Coordinating with other departments on such a pressing matter was no easy task, and they worried that Brendan would eventually ditch his cell phone and disappear. Thankfully, officers of the Memphis Police Department's Fugitive Task Force sprang into action. They found and surrounded 22-year-old Brendan at a gas station just off the interstate and arrested him without incident. Inside his pickup, they recovered the .40 caliber semi-automatic Glock handgun. Brendan was extradited to Lafayette County, Mississippi just a few days after Allie's brutal murder, but investigators still had to prove that he had actually killed her. While he was in custody, investigators searched his apartment and found a bizarre letter he had written to his parents shortly before Allie was killed. Brendan never sent the letter, but he wanted his parents to know that he often had terrible thoughts that were intensified by cocaine and alcohol that he regularly consumed. The note also said that he thought the end was near, and that he would probably end up in jail or perhaps even dead. It's unclear if Brendan's reference to the end meant he was considering taking his own life. Another theory is that he may have envisioned a deadly shootout with police. Whatever the case, investigators found more circumstantial evidence while combing through his computer, cell phone, and social media accounts. GPS data showed that Brendan and Allie's cell phones were in nearly identical locations both before and after her death, but this didn't prove that Brendan had killed Allie. But it was strong circumstantial evidence because it seemed to indicate that he took her phone from the crime scene and either disposed of it or destroyed it on his way back to Oxford. Investigators also found a number of tasteless tweets and posts while searching through Brendan's social media accounts. One was even made on the same day of Allie's body being discovered. It made a thinly veiled reference to a 1982 hit, "You Dropped a Bomb on Me." To investigators, there was a clear parallel between the song and how he felt when Allie told him that she might be pregnant. Ironically, the medical examiner who performed her autopsy determined that she was never actually pregnant. The authorities were already convinced that Brendan had killed Allie, but the case got even stronger when the ballistic test confirmed that the bullets that had killed Allie had been fired from his Glock pistol. A Mississippi grand jury indicted Brendan Thiesfeld on a capital murder charge on August 20, 2019. Brendan was charged with capital murder instead of first-degree murder because, according to the indictment, he kidnapped Allie before murdering her. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Brendan, his father released a controversial statement to a Mississippi television station. He said that he knew Brendan was innocent and he asked the public to reserve judgment and presume that he was innocent until found guilty in a court of law. Allie's friends and family held a memorial in honor of her life, and to remember the impact she had on their lives. Her smile, her light will never be forgotten. Allie Costell's friends, they're making sure of that. The Ole Miss student from St. Louis was shot to death last weekend. There must have been more than 100 people tonight to honor her. Allie's friends say they appreciate the turnout, but Allie would have appreciated even more. There must have been more than 100 people at the vigil. Allie's friends say they appreciate that turnout, because there was nothing she loved more than having her friends together. It was emotional. There were lots of hugs and lots of tears. I may have been Allie's teacher, but clearly listening to everybody's thoughts tonight, she taught a lot of us as well. And I know our candles are burning, but Allie clearly is a light that's going to shine on in each and every one of you. She didn't deserve what happened to her. Nobody does, but she didn't especially. And I just want everyone to remember that. I want everyone to focus on how good of a person she was and how much joy she brought into the world and how positive she was, not the situation. Others took to social media to express the disgust they felt toward Brendan for allegedly committing such a gruesome and senseless murder. Brendan's trial was postponed for nearly 2 years because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Even so, he entered a not guilty plea on the capital murder charge, and his defense attorney initially asked that he be released on a reasonable bond. But before the judge could rule on the request, Brandon's attorney asked that he be kept in custody until a psychiatric evaluation could be performed. This may have been a legal maneuver in anticipation of a not guilty by reason of insanity plea, but Brandon was found to be sane and therefore competent to stand trial in late 2020. After lengthy negotiations between the prosecution and defense, the charge was changed from capital murder to first-degree murder in the summer of 2021. Brandon promptly pleaded guilty. Mandy, surely this murder case captivated people from St. Louis, where Allie's from, to Lafayette County, Mississippi, where she studied business at Ole Mississippi. After seemingly no movement in court because of COVID, now there's a guilty plea coming from her former classmate, Brandon Thiesfeld. Here's Thiesfeld's lawyer, Tony Fairs. It's been approved by the Castell family. The charge of capital murder for which Brandon was indicted will be reduced to that of first-degree or simple murder. Brandon Thiesfeld will be spared the death penalty in this plea deal. He'll now face a life sentence but does have the chance for release. What's available to him is not parole. It's called conditional release. After serving 15 years, and if you attain the age of 65, you may petition the sentencing court for release. As part of the new deal, Brandon would take the stand to lay out every detail of the crime he had committed. The Castells, the Thiesfeld, and a dozen of Allie's friends and sorority sisters were present during the trial. The atmosphere in the courtroom was understandably tense and emotional. Neither Brandon nor his attorney ever revealed a motive for the murder, but according to Lafayette County District Attorney Ben Creekmore, he killed Allie because he didn't want a child. This was a particularly heartbreaking moment for friends and family, because by then everyone knew she had never actually been pregnant. As heartbreaking as the proceedings were, the trial wasn't particularly tense or dramatic because he had already confessed and pled guilty to first-degree murder. As such, he was convicted and given a life sentence at the Mississippi State Penitentiary, or as it is more commonly known, Parchman Farm. However, there is still a chance that Brandon could get out of prison one day. In Mississippi, anyone convicted of first-degree murder may be released after serving 15 years, or when they become 65 years old. That said, there is no guarantee that he will ever be released and he may well die in prison. After the verdict was read, Brandon apologized to Cindy and Keith Castell for killing their daughter, and for the pain that he caused their family. He also said that he wished he could take it all back. He asked for God's forgiveness, and he hoped they would be able to forgive him as well one day. Afterward, statements from Allie's parents were read aloud by the Lafayette County Assistant District Attorney Mickey Millette. Cindy Castell's statement spoke of the undying love she shared with her daughter, and how Brandon had robbed them of all of their future memories. She also called Brandon an evil and sinister monster, and she hoped that he remembered the heinous crime every time his cell door slammed shut. Even now, Allie's parents admit they are still in denial. Keith Castell says that he still occasionally thinks that she's away at Old Miss, and it's just a matter of time before he will see her again. After their son was convicted, Brandon's parents released a statement. According to his mother, Carrie, she couldn't believe that her son was capable of such a crime when she heard that he was being questioned, nor did she or her husband have any idea that he had such emotional problems. In the end, they readily admitted that their son, Brandon, did kill Allie. To prevent a similar tragedy from affecting other families, she urged parents to talk to their children regularly, and to let them know that nothing was so big, complicated, or taboo that it couldn't be discussed openly. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment down below your take on it, and please subscribe to the channel. Also, hit the notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.